Saba couldn't feel her legs the day she woke from surgery, but what hurt more was the way Lonnie looked at her. Like she was already gone. She gave him 12 years. He gave her 10 days before bringing the papers. But as he signed her away, Saba was holding something he never expected. A secret will, sealed months ago, with one line that would destroy everything he thought he'd inherited. Saba was the kind of woman who always put others before herself. As a school administrator, she cared for every child like they were her own. One sunny morning, during a routine fire drill, chaos broke out when a small boy panicked and ran in the wrong direction. Without thinking twice, Saba rushed after him. In her hurry, she missed a step on the staircase, slipped, and fell hard. The sound of her body hitting the concrete echoed through the building. When she woke up in the hospital, she couldn't feel her legs. The doctor gently explained that her spine had been seriously damaged, and she might never walk again. Tears filled her eyes, not just because of the pain, but because her whole life had changed in a single moment. At first Lonnie, her husband of 12 years, stayed by her side. He held her hand, brought flowers, and whispered promises of forever. But forever didn't last long. As the days passed, his visits became shorter. He stopped looking her in the eye. When she cried at night, he no longer held her. He started staying late at work, claiming meetings and stress. But Saba could feel it. The distance, the silence, the coldness. Saba was in a wheelchair now. But that wasn't the only thing that hurt. What crushed her heart was how quickly Lonnie began to treat her like a burden. She never complained. She smiled when he walked in, even if he barely spoke. She thanked him for every little thing, though deep down, she missed the way he used to love her. As her body fought to heal, her spirit began to break. She would sit alone in her room, staring at the walls, wondering where the man who once called her his queen had gone. The worst part wasn't the paralysis. It was realizing that the one person she trusted most was slipping away just when she needed him the most. And in those long, quiet nights, Saba started to understand something deep and painful. Sometimes, love isn't tested by good days but by the bad ones. And not everyone stays when things fall apart. For the first few days after Saba came home in a wheelchair, Lonnie acted like a good husband. He brought her warm soup, fluffed her pillows, and told her not to worry. But something about him didn't feel right. His voice had changed, not the tone he once used when he called her my love. Now it sounded like he was doing a favor, not taking care of his wife. Late at night, when he thought she was asleep, Saba would hear him whispering on the phone in the other room. He laughed softly, using a sweet voice she hadn't heard in a long time. Not with her, but with someone else. She stayed quiet, pretending to sleep, but her heart broke every time. One morning, when he leaned in to kiss her forehead before leaving, she noticed red lipstick smudged lightly on his collar. It wasn't hers. She tried to ignore it. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe she was imagining things. But deep inside, she knew something had changed. Lonnie no longer looked at her with love. His touch felt cold, his words short. She felt invisible in her own home. Then one afternoon, he came home with a surprise. A woman stepped in behind him. Tall, pretty, confident. Lonnie introduced her as Dunia, his new business assistant. He said Dunia would be staying in the guest house for a few weeks to help manage the business, since he was now too busy taking care of Saba. Saba smiled politely, but her heart sank. She watched how Lonnie looked at Dunia. The way his eyes followed her, the way he laughed freely around her. Dunia acted kind in front of others, but when no one was watching, she barely acknowledged Saba. It was clear to Saba, Dunia wasn't just a helper. She was the reason for the lipstick. The reason Lonnie stayed out late. The reason her marriage was falling apart. Lonnie tried to play both sides. He would feed Saba soup with one hand, wiping her mouth gently, and then later disappear into the guest house where Dunia stayed. Saba wasn't stupid. She saw the way Dunia touched his arm, how he didn't pull away. She saw the stolen glances, the quiet giggles. What hurt Saba the most wasn't just the betrayal. It was how quickly she had become a shadow in her own life. A woman sitting in silence while another took her place. And Lonnie? He didn't even hide it well. Because deep down, he thought she had no power left. But Saba was watching. Quietly. Carefully. And soon, she would show them both what strength really looked like. Days turned into weeks, and Saba could feel her world falling apart piece by piece. Lonnie, who once used to check on her every hour, now barely looked her in the eye. His love had turned into something cold, almost like pity, and even that started to fade. He would leave early, come home late, barely speak. Sometimes she waited the whole day just to hear him say something kind. But all she got was silence, or worse, fake smiles. She tried to keep herself together. She still said thank you when he brought her water. She still smiled when he opened the window for fresh air. But inside, her heart was breaking. Every day she hoped he'd notice her pain, sit beside her, and just talk, like they used to. But Lonnie had already moved on, even though he was still living in the same house. One night, after a long silence at dinner, Saba gathered the courage to ask, "Lonnie, do you still see me as your wife?" He didn't look up from his phone. He simply said, "I didn't marry a patient, Saba." The words hit her like a slap. She couldn't breathe for a moment. She blinked fast, trying to hold back tears. She had feared this moment for weeks, and now it was real. He didn't see her as the same woman anymore. Not because she changed, but because she could no longer walk. What made it worse was how his family joined in. Lonnie's mother and sister visited and spoke like she wasn't even in the room. They said things like, "Lonnie needs a strong wife, not someone stuck in a chair. And he deserves a real woman who can give him a full life." Saba heard every word. She stayed quiet, her hands clenched in her lap, but inside she was screaming. She didn't argue. She didn't cry in front of them. But something inside her changed that day. She realized they had already decided who she was, weak, broken, useless. And now, she had to prove to herself that they were wrong. From that night, Saba stopped asking Lonnie for anything. No more, "Can you get me water?" or "Help me reach my medicine." She started doing what she could on her own. Quietly, she began writing down things, little things, what he said, what he did, who visited, what time he left, what time he came back. Every detail, she documented it all. She didn't know exactly what she was going to do yet, but deep inside, she promised herself one thing. She would not let this pain go to waste. One day, all this would matter. One day, they would all see who the real burden was. And it wasn't her point. 2 months after the accident, Saba was still trying to adjust to her new life. Every day was hard, not just because of the wheelchair, but because of how Lonnie treated her. He barely talked to her anymore. He avoided her eyes, avoided conversations, and avoided any moment that made him feel responsible. She could feel he was waiting for something, and soon, she found out what it was. One morning, while she was sitting near the window, watching the sky, Lonnie walked in with a brown envelope in his hand. He placed it on the table beside her and said, without emotion, "It's time. Just sign them, Saba. This isn't the life either of us wanted." She looked at the envelope, then at him. Divorce papers. Just like that. After 12 years of marriage, all he could say was sign them. No sadness, no regret. Like she was just a problem he was finally solving. Saba didn't cry. She didn't scream. She only nodded slowly and said, "Okay." Lonnie thought he had won. That she would quietly sign the papers and let him go. What he didn't know was that Saba had already made her move. A few weeks earlier, during one of the rare times she was left alone at home, she had contacted her lawyer, the one who used to work for her late father. Her father had left her a piece of land and a well-known local business. It was her inheritance, her pride, and something she had quietly protected for years. Without telling anyone, Saba had updated her will. In that will, she removed Lonnie's name completely and transferred full ownership of the land and business to someone else. Someone she trusted more than anyone. Lonnie had always assumed that, being her husband, everything she owned would one day belong to him. That once the divorce was done, he could walk away with her father's legacy in his pocket. But Saba had been smarter. She saw the change in him long ago and prepared for this moment silently. She signed the divorce papers that evening, but she also sent a message to her lawyer confirming the new will had been sealed. Her hands trembled, but not from fear, from strength. She was no longer the quiet, broken woman sitting by the window. She was a woman who had been betrayed and left behind, but she didn't stay down. Lonnie thought she had nothing left. He thought she was too weak to fight. But what he didn't see was that while he was planning to leave, she was already one step ahead, protecting what truly mattered, her dignity, her legacy, her name. It was late at night. The house was quiet. Lonnie had gone out, saying he had a meeting, but Saba knew exactly where he was, probably with Dunia. The same Dunia who now walked around the house like she owned it. She smiled sweetly in front of guests, acted helpful when others were around, but when it was just the two of them, her mask dropped. That night, Dunia walked into Saba's room without knocking. She stood there with her arms crossed, smirking. "You really think he's still yours?" she said, her voice dripping with pride. "Lonnie is mine now. He's going to marry me. You're just useless." A broken woman sitting in a chair, waiting for pity. Saba stayed silent. She looked up at Dunia, but not with anger. Her face was calm, unreadable. What Dunia didn't know was that Saba had her phone hidden behind a pillow, recording every cruel word she was saying. Dunia walked closer, still talking. "Soon you'll be gone. Out of this house. Out of his life. And everything that was once yours? It'll be mine. The house. The business. The respect. All of it. You're nothing now, Saba. Nothing but a sad little shadow." Saba didn't reply. She didn't cry. She just kept looking at Dunia, holding her tongue. When Dunia finally left the room, still laughing under her breath, Saba took a deep breath and ended the recording. Her hands shook a little as she sent the audio to her lawyer. No words needed, just the file. Her lawyer had already been working quietly behind the scenes with her. That night, Saba gave the final go-ahead. The plan they had discussed, the one Lonnie and Dunia had no idea about, was now in motion. Saba sat in the dark for a long time, staring at the door Dunia had just walked through. Her heart hurt, yes, but not because of the insult. Not because someone called her useless. What hurt was how easily people could step on others when they thought they were weak. But in that moment, Saba realized something powerful. Her strength was never in her legs. It was never about walking or standing tall. Her strength was in her silence. In her mind. In her ability to wait, plan, and rise without shouting. She didn't need to fight with words. She didn't need to prove herself to Dunia or beg Lonnie for love. She was done with all that. Let them think they were winning. Because the real storm was coming. And when it did, they wouldn't even see it coming. Until it was too late. Saba knew she had to leave. Not just the house, but the life that had slowly crushed her spirit. But she couldn't just walk out like everyone else. She had to plan it quietly, carefully, and most of all, smartly. So, she pretended to be weaker than she really was. She acted like she needed help with everything. Like she had no strength left. Lonnie and Dunia believed it. They saw her as helpless, stuck, powerless. That's exactly what she wanted them to think. For days, Saba worked quietly with her nurse friend, Amira, and her lawyer. Every small thing was arranged, transport, timing, even where she'd stay. She told no one else, not even the housemaid. Every move had to be clean, silent, without drama. She left behind only what she didn't need anymore. And one very important thing under her bed. A locked wooden box. One night, just past midnight, Saba wheeled herself slowly into the hallway. Amira met her by the back door. They didn't speak. The car was waiting outside, the lawyer already inside. Saba didn't cry. She didn't look back. She had already said her goodbyes in her heart. The moment she crossed the gate, it felt like a heavy chain had been lifted from her chest. The next morning, Lonnie returned home and went straight to the room. But Saba was gone. Her bed was neatly made, her wheelchair missing, her phone switched off. For a moment he panicked. Not because he was worried for her safety, but because he knew her leaving could delay the divorce or bring unwanted legal issues. He immediately called the police and filed a missing person report that he told people he was worried and confused, but in truth he was scared she had taken back control. Dunia looked nervous too, asking again and again if Saba had told anyone where she was going. But no one knew. No one but two people. Her nurse and her lawyer. Later that day, the housemaid was cleaning the room and noticed something under the bed. It was a locked wooden box with Saba's name carved into it. She handed it to Lonnie, but he couldn't open it. No key, no clue. Out of frustration, he called Saba's lawyer, demanding answers. But instead of replying, the lawyer said calmly, "Thank you. That box was meant for me. That box held everything Saba had been planning. Documents, evidence, secrets, and most importantly, her next move." Saba hadn't run away. She had simply stepped out of the prison they built around her. Not loudly, not with drama, just quietly with power. And now, the story wasn't going the way Lonnie thought it would. Not anymore. The day of the divorce hearing arrived, and Lonnie walked into the courtroom looking confident, almost relaxed. He believed it would be a simple process, just some paperwork, a few signatures, and then freedom, along with the house, the business, and everything Saba owned. Dunia was with him, sitting in the back, dressed like she already belonged in his new life. But what Lonnie didn't expect was for Saba to appear. When the courtroom doors opened, Saba entered in her wheelchair, dressed in soft but elegant clothes, her head held high. Her face was calm, her eyes strong. Everyone turned to look. Even the judge paused for a moment, surprised by her presence. She didn't look like a broken woman. She looked like someone who had found her power. Saba didn't say a word. She simply nodded to her lawyer, who stood and placed a sealed wooden box on the table in front of the judge. Lonnie's smile faded. He leaned forward, watching closely. The judge asked, "What's in the box?" The lawyer opened it slowly and began to lay out the contents one by one. First came a copy of the updated will, showing that Saba had removed Lonnie completely and given her late father's land and business to someone else. Then came a printed transcript and audio file, the voice recording, of Dunia mocking Saba, calling her useless, and bragging about stealing her husband. And finally, the most shocking of all, a set of documents showing that Lonnie had forged Saba's signature to try and transfer ownership of her property to himself without her knowledge. Gasps filled the room. Even Lonnie's mother, who had supported him throughout, covered her mouth in shock. The judge looked furious. Lonnie tried to speak, to explain, but his words stumbled. The lawyer continued calmly, explaining how Saba had documented everything, how she had left nothing to chance. The judge raised his hand to silence the room. Then he turned to Lonnie and said, "Not only is this divorce proceeding suspended, but there will be a full investigation into your actions." Lonnie's face turned pale. Dunia slipped quietly out the back of the courtroom, avoiding everyone's eyes. The judge looked at Saba and nodded with respect. Saba didn't smile, but her eyes glowed. She had not come to fight. She had come to finish what was started. With quiet strength and careful planning, she had turned the story upside down. And in that moment, everyone understood. This wasn't just a divorce hearing. It was the day Saba's silence spoke louder than anything they had ever heard. The courtroom was silent after Saba's lawyer finished speaking. The evidence had been laid out clearly: the forged documents, the secret recording, and the updated will. Lonnie sat frozen in his seat, his face pale, his lips trembling. He tried to speak, but no words came. Dunia, who had slipped back inside hoping to stay unnoticed, now looked around nervously, realizing this wasn't going the way they had planned. The judge took a long pause. Then, in a firm voice, he said, "This court does not only see betrayal, but a clear case of fraud." He turned to Lonnie and continued, "You forged documents, lied about your wife's health, and tried to steal property that was never yours." Lonnie looked down, his hands shaking. The judge picked up his pen and declared, "The divorce claim is dismissed. All of Mr. Lonnie's financial accounts will be frozen, effective immediately. Further investigation into the fraudulent transfer will begin today." Gasps filled the room again. Dunia tried to slip out quietly, but the judge called her name. "Miss Dunia," he said, "your involvement in this matter will also be looked into. You may want to find legal representation." Her eyes widened. The confidence she once carried had vanished. She no longer looked like the proud woman who mocked Saba in private. She looked exposed, humiliated, and scared. The judge turned to Saba. His tone softened. "Ma'am," he said, "you are the only one standing here today, not because of your legs, but because of your courage, your grace, and your truth." Saba didn't speak. She simply nodded, tears quietly resting in her eyes but not falling. She had waited so long for this moment. Not for revenge, but for justice, for her voice to be heard, for her pain to matter. She was granted full control over all her assets, her late father's land and business, and complete protection from any further interference by Lonnie or his family. Lonnie sat in silence, looking like a man who had lost everything. And truly he had. The life he thought he would build on lies had just crumbled in front of everyone. As the judge stood up to leave, everyone remained quiet, still trying to absorb what had just happened. Saba slowly turned her wheelchair and rolled out of the courtroom, her head held high. No crowd, no chairs, just quiet dignity. And Lonnie, he was left sitting alone, staring at the door she had just exited through. The same door that had now closed on all his greedy dreams. Months passed after the courtroom drama, and life began to settle in a new way for Saba. The noise had faded. No more lawyers, no more fake smiles, no more pretending to be okay. For the first time in a long while, she was free, not just from Lonnie but from everything that had made her feel small. She moved into her late father's old country home. A quiet, peaceful place surrounded by trees and soft winds. The house had been locked for years, left untouched since his passing. But now, it was alive again. Not with noise, but with strength. Saba had it repaired, every corner reminding her of childhood memories and her father's love. The garden bloomed again. The air felt fresh. It didn't feel like a new beginning, it felt like coming home. Amira, the nurse who had stayed by her side through everything, became more than a friend. Together, they started something meaningful, a small wellness center in the village, a place where trauma patients, people who had been hurt, broken, or abandoned, could come for care, comfort, and hope. They didn't have a big staff or expensive tools, but they had heart, they had kindness, and they had stories, real stories of survival. Saba still had pain. Her legs didn't move like they used to. Some nights, memories came back. The fall, Lonnie's cold words, Dunia's mocking face. But she no longer cried over them. She had survived them. That alone was her victory. She didn't tell people she won anything, because it never felt like a game. It wasn't about beating Lonnie or proving a point. It was about surviving something that almost broke her. It was about waking up every day and choosing not to be bitter. Choosing peace over revenge, dignity over drama. People in the village slowly began to hear her story. Some came just to meet her. Others came with their own pain, hoping for advice or just someone who would listen. Saba never made big speeches. She simply listened, nodded, and shared what helped her survive. She smiled more now. Not because life was perfect, but because it was hers. Fully hers. She had built something new from the ruins. And that quiet strength, the one no one saw before, now shone brighter than ever. Saba knew healing wasn't a straight path. She was still walking. It slowly, one breath at a time. But this time, she wasn't looking back. Her story wasn't about falling or being abandoned. It was about rising, silently, powerfully, and with her dignity untouched. It was a bright afternoon. Months after everything had ended, a community event was being held in the town square, filled with laughter, music, and the voices of young girls eager to learn and grow. At the center of it all sat Saba, no longer hidden, no longer broken. She wore a simple white dress, her hair pulled back neatly, and her voice, calm but strong, carried across the crowd as she spoke. She wasn't preaching. She was sharing. Telling those girls that strength isn't always loud, and survival isn't always pretty. She spoke about choosing yourself when no one else does. About getting up even when life tries to push you down again and again. About losing everything and still deciding to move forward with grace. Unnoticed in the back of the crowd, Lonnie stood still. No fancy suit. No Dunia. No cameras. Just him alone, in the middle of people who didn't know or care who he used to be. He watched her in silence, eyes fixed on the woman he once tried to destroy. The woman he thought would disappear quietly after he betrayed her. But Saba hadn't disappeared. She had become more powerful than he could ever imagine. Not because of money or fame, but because she had peace. Real, quiet peace that no lie or loss could steal. As she ended her speech, the girls clapped and cheered. Saba smiled gently at them, full of warmth. And then, as if sensing his presence without needing to look, she turned her head toward the back of the crowd. Her eyes met his. No smile. No frown. No hatriz. Just a calm gaze. For a brief second, time froze. Lonnie's heart sank. He had prepared himself for anger or coldness, something he could respond to. But this peace, this silent power, it crushed him more than any words ever could. Saba didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She simply turned her chair around and rolled forward. Not toward him, not away from him, but into her own life. A life she had rebuilt, piece by piece, without him. A life filled with purpose, healing, and truth. And just like that, she was gone. But her presence stayed, not in the air, but in his memory. Because he finally understood. She hadn't just survived. She had lived, fully. powerfully, and without him. And for the first time, Lonnie realized that was the real loss. That if this story touched your heart, if you believe in the strength of women who rise even when broken, then don't scroll without sharing this. Tag someone who needs to hear. You don't have to win to be powerful. Just survive with dignity. Drop a heart in the comments if you've ever come back stronger from betrayal. Share this with 3 people to remind them. Peace is the loudest revenge. Follow for more powerful stories that prove the end is never the end, it's a new beginning.